So that was you two
performing
one,
which I did not realize was something
in response to the AIDS crisis,
which was the great
health
health crisis
of the
of the
1980s,
and has continued with us in some respects,
many respects.
And it's for today's show. By the way, this is what's going on. I'm your host, Hugo Fernandez, here on LaGuardia Web Radio, WLGR. And my guest today is Dr. Louis Mazzaria from the LaGuardia Social Science Department, who teaches history and has been working with his students to document the medical issue of our day, COVID-19 and the pandemic. Welcome, Dr. Mazzaria.
Welcome. Thank you very much for having me, and I appreciate the chance.
Of course, and we're going to be joined by one of your students who at 115 who is participating in the project. Alba Hanawa is going to talk a little bit about and possibly even read her own submission to the archive. But I wanted to give you a chance to introduce yourself. Dr. Mazzaria, you want to talk a little bit about your background and your studies before LaGuardia?
Sure. I've been at LaGuardia for about 5 years, and this is something that really hit home with me because it's something I've been doing for a long time, sampling in on students' thoughts. Before coming to LaGuardia, I spent a dozen years teaching at a couple of different universities in Istanbul, Turkey, and teaching American history in Turkey was interesting because you really saw students who were all over the political spectrum and cultural and social spectrum, and a lot of times students would be maybe a little reluctant to really voice their opinions in class. So at the very beginning of each class, I would ask students why they were taking the class and to tell me a little bit about themselves and the variety of what I got. I mean, I remember one student from Albania who wrote very movingly that he was taking the class because when he grew up, his parents were out in the streets protesting against the communist government and hoping that one day they would be like America. Another student wrote, "I am taking this course because I am an enemy of the United States." So you see what I mean? I mean, things were all and just absolutely fascinating to sample in on. Very bright, young students in Istanbul. So coming to LaGuardia and recognizing the great diversity in the classes, in the American history classes at LaGuardia, where one student would have been born, just in Long Island City, and the next student might have been born in Nepal or Colombia. And so to continue that idea and get a sense of why students were taking American history was completely fascinating. So once the pandemic began last spring, and Dr. Richard Lieberman of the archives suggested to all the faculty that we kind of sample in on how students are reacting. And this was just sort of right as the lockdown was beginning, and I think within days of the cancellation of classes. For me, that was a natural. And I found, just as I had in Istanbul, that it really, so many times students in class, like anybody, maybe they don't immediately sort of come out in class with all kinds of different thoughts, but you give a chance to write a paragraph or two. And what comes out is often very, very revealing, very, very interesting, and I think for students very useful to look back on. And I found that the case here. So with this completely unknown situation, and with this lockdown just beginning, it really kind of gave people a chance, it seemed to me. And I really, really appreciated how the students just responded, and really, in many cases, poured their hearts out in relation to how they were experiencing this. And the overall goal really was, and again, this goes back years too, to not have history be something apart from your life, but to have history be something connected with your life. And certainly in a situation like this last spring, and everyone had the realization that we were living in history, right? And so to be taking, for 20-year-old students, for 25-year-old students, for 30-year-old returning students, to be taking American history and to be so absolutely conscious of the fact that that I am living history, and making this direct connection between, the 17th century, 18th century, 19th century, 20th century, and that was just a natural. And so the flowering of these responses was gratifying to me, and part of what was gratifying was knowing that, was really being able to see how well they responded.
Yeah, it's interesting because you talk about this. I mean, I get very caught up with the mechanics of teaching, and trying to engage students through the Zoom platform, and there's a degree of frustration that I experience, and I'm trying to figure out what to do, especially as we move into the fall. 25% of the classes are going to be on campus, right? And trying to figure out, does that mean, are we ready to change some of the rules, like mandating cameras on, mandating sound on, that kind of thing, as part of the engagement process. But then I get an email, and the student's telling me, "Professor, I tested positive, and I'm going to be behind on that assignment. Is that okay?" And it just totally, puts me into, it points out what matters, what's important. So
For sure.
I think what's interesting about what you're doing, though, is, we all we live our own lives and we live our own histories, but you are turning them on to this aspect of it. I mean, what is it? History is told by the winners. And but history is the product of people taking the time to take note of their experience and memorializing that in some manner. And that's
For sure.
what you're turning them on to through this project with the archives. And I'm excited that we're going to get a chance to actually read some of these as well. Interesting times.
And I would just just to respond that question of the frustrations of Zoom and all of this are ubiquitous now.
Right.
But part of what I've done and sort of been lucky enough to do, I mean, I teach a subject that is just inherently visual. If American history does not have visuals, whether they're photographs, whether it's artwork, whether it's illustration, all kinds of things, I don't know what subject does, So I've, over the years, put together many PowerPoints of all kinds of imagery. And so, I tend to rely on, I'll make PowerPoint videos and send them, and do that asynchronously, and every week. Right back and forth with students. Tell me what interested you about this. And so to a certain degree, I do it kind of old school. And with every student, I write back and forth every single week about what has interested them. And the function of actually taking the time to put it on, I almost said put it on paper. But to write down their reactions is, I think in many ways it surprised students how it's made them think.
So it's more engaging actually in the asynchronous model.
And you can't hide in the back of the classroom.
So we're joined by one of your students, Alba Hanawa. Am I saying that right now?
Yes.
Cuban, by the way, it's from the Havana side, and they do all kinds of things with vowels. Hanau. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, we have you for a very discreet period of time. Thank you for joining us. And I want to give you a chance. Would you like to introduce yourself a little bit? Tell us a little bit about your background before we get into it.
Sure. So like you said, my name is Alba. I'm from Dominican Republic. I came here when I was 11 years old. I'm currently I just my major to healthcare management. It's part of my job. I'm doing like administrative part. So I was just like, let me just change the major. That's my passion. I have a daughter. I have my daughter in the pandemic. That's why I wrote my paper for Mazzaria about her. She was light of the in the middle of the pandemic. She was the light for me. And it was stressful time, but she made me go through it, and it was all worth it.
Well, that must have been frightening in the sense that here you are. I mean, you knew you were going to have to find yourself in a hospital setting for the delivery. And of course, in the pandemic, the hospitals were kind of ground zero for this drama that was going. I mean, we've had some folks from the healthcare industry talk about what the conditions were like and how people who needed very simple medical procedures were not even being allowed. And so how did that work out for you when you had to? I mean, did you find yourself in there after the big the period or something?
Yeah, I was due for August. I delivered a week early, so I delivered in July 30th. It was a little complicated because I was only allowed one person. I'm very close with my mom, so it was a hard decision for me to decide between the baby's father or my mother. But I wanted to give the opportunity to him because he was the father. So it was a very hard decision for me to make at the time. The hospital for the delivery section, they kind of at that time it wasn't very crowded, so it was a little bit more comfortable. But for me to go to appointments, to checkups, it was just me alone. So and they would take me to places isolated parts of it, whereas it was only me and the sonogram lady or me and the doctor. It was like nobody around or anything, with masks on, with gloves on. They would put like for do procedures for me, they would put like a whole gown on it. It was too much. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I just it's funny because I'm like probably most people have gone without simple medical stuff for the duration of the pandemic. I've gotten the vaccinations now, so I'm going into the city and I'm going to hit everybody up in one shot: dentist, dermatologist, cardiologist, who is my GP, and but you didn't have a choice. I mean, you had to engage with the health industry in the middle of probably one of the most trying times they've had. In recent history, certainly. Well, let's talk a little bit about the project. So, how you're teaching American history, right, Dr. Mazzaria? So, how does this fit in? How do you make it? How do you fit it into the class? How did it become part of the class?
Sure. Let me just mention too, just to follow up on the healthcare industry. One of Alba's classmates was writing, and this is, I mean, I guess to talk about the intensity of this writing, and then I'll go to that question. I could see that in her response to me. It was sort of a page response. She's saying, I haven't left my room for days. She's saying, I'm writing from Elmhurst. And at the time, Elmhurst Hospital was the epicenter of the epicenter. And she was sort of, her apartment was walking distance. She and her mom shared an apartment. And she said, I won't go out and see my mom. I am afraid I think I have COVID, but I'm afraid to go to the hospital because if I don't, I'm afraid that I might get it at the hospital and bring it home to my mom. And I would rather die than to bring it to my mom. And so this is the kind of response that, and to answer your question, it's, I think a lot of times history can be seen as something sort of distant, as something that's, a bunch of dates, generals, presidents, kings, and not really connected to your emotional, center. And so what really this kind of writing did was to really fuse that sense of the long term and the distant perspective with the most intimate emotional perspective you can have. And I think it really, the point being to make that, to draw that line and to show that history does not need to be considered as something separate from the very visceral sense of your own life.
Right. So your notion for the project was actually in response to students who were, sending you emails, sending you responses to your readings. Or is this something you decided like let's do, and you actually worked it into the syllabus?
Yeah, it's part of what I've done for years. At the very it was so interesting too last spring in that, and different than any of the subsequent terms, because we had, what was it, 2 or 3 weeks, not a long time, but we were in class for about, just really getting the semester going, and then made that switch. So I had already asked students to write me a little bit about themselves. And so in a way, this was a sequel.
You saw it coming? Is this what you're saying?
Did not see it coming, but I just it's part of what fits so well for me is because I do this at the beginning of every term anyways, is ask students to tell me about themselves. So it was really just a follow-up just a few weeks later, probably a month later. Now tell me where you are.
Right. When did the notion of getting the archives involved begin?
Dr. Lieberman, right in amongst this, within the, I would say at the end of March of last year, as the semester was just getting underway, and as classes first canceled. The folks at the archives are, at this point, very accustomed to thinking and moving very quickly. I think partly because of things like, there's a long historical perspective at the archives. Thinking back 20 years to September 11th, and doing an archives project at that time, and I think just even previous and being involved with all kinds of different events in New York history, so that really immediately, as soon as classes got canceled, Dr. Lieberman wrote sort of suggesting this, and so for me it was just a natural, because it fit right into my methodology anyways. But really, they were right on top of it as soon as classes got canceled and the lockdown began.
Yeah, and I should qualify, because I don't know if I was clear in the beginning. We're talking about the LaGuardia Wagner archives as opposed to, for example, the institutional archives, which are housed in the LaGuardia Library through Thomas Cleary. But wanted to go back to something that Dr. Mazzaria was saying earlier in the show, and ask you this question, Alba. Why were you taking an American history class? How did you find yourself in Dr. Mazzaria's class?
Well, to be honest, I needed the credit. But when I started reading the syllabus, I noticed I'm coming from the Dominican Republic, and I was at that time when I took the class, I was in the middle of doing my citizenship application and stuff, and I already had the interview. I was going to the interview, and it really got me interested just to read about the history in the back, like 2000, what happened in 2020 for September 11th. I didn't know much about it because I was a kid. But once I came to the United States and then started going to high school, it was really implemented in all my U.S. history classes. I didn't get the clear idea at the time because my English was not as well as now. And then I just wanted to really catch up too, because I went to LaGuardia in 2016 when I graduated high school, but I dropped out. So all those years without having, no U.S. history, no at all, no classes at all, I needed it to catch up. So I felt the need, besides needing the credit, I feel the need that I needed to know more about U.S. history, especially since I was becoming a U.S. citizen.
Okay. And by the way, the class, which class are we talking? Is this like from, the beginning of colonialism to, I don't know what, the Civil War, or is it the one that takes us into the present? I don't know how they're chopped up. I'm guessing that it's a what we in the arts we called, I forget what they're called, but where you cover large areas of it. It'll come to me, of course, after the show. But so which course are we talking here?
I think partly because so many students who take these introductory classes, 101 and 102, corresponding to exactly what you're saying, up to the Civil War and then after the Civil War, and so many students, I think it's like your case is very, very exemplary in that are only going to take one course, and they need the credit. And so what I try to do is sort of bridge both of those courses, knowing that they're interested, then they'll go on to a higher level course that'll specialize a little bit more. But even and this course is modern American history, but still cover, the founding of the country. And it's like so many students now are interested, wrapped up in, we saw from like last summer's protests and everything, questions of, what is the Constitution? What is the Bill of Rights? Where does freedom of speech, for example, actually, where does it come from? Where is it written down? These kinds of questions. So even in modern American history, those kinds of things. And so we cover that as well as coming right up to the present.
Yeah.
It's a lot to do in one semester, but
that's right. It's so funny because the day of my interview, all these questions were brought up, like where does the Constitution come from? What is it? Like when was the World War II? When happened? What was the date? And it was this class really helped me a lot.
Yeah, and it's funny because sometimes when I'm talking about the past, it's a vague thing to our students that World War II or World War One. By the way, it's 1:29. I want to just do the station break now. So the show is What's Going On. I'm your host Hugo Fernandez, and we're here on LaGuardia Web Radio WLGR, louder than you think. And today's show with Dr. Louis Mazzaria from the Social Science Department here at LaGuardia Community College, who is working with the LaGuardia and Wagner archives to document and preserve stories of our students as we go through the COVID-19 pandemic. And we have one of his students here today, Alba Hanau, who took the Modern American History class. And we had talked about this before the show, and maybe now is a good time to try it, to maybe read some of these texts that are going to be in the archive. And we'd like to start with Alba's. Alba, would you like to read yours?
Sure. Let me just put that up. Okay, awesome. So it starts like this. Coronavirus came and hit us when we least expected it. Took us by surprise, not only us, but the whole world. However, it taught me that family is everything and that spending quality time with family is very important. Before coronavirus, I was very busy working and saving money for a better future. I was working a lot of extra hours because I was 3 months pregnant at the time when the pandemic started. I knew that what was coming was a big responsibility. I was financially stable, I could say. However, with the help of my parents and my fiance, I was confident that I was going to meet my goals. Once all of this started, it hit me really hard. Not only because I lost my job, it was also being locked down alone in the house. My parents and my fiance are essential workers, and they didn't have no other option but to risk their life every day to help others. We what we did and still do is to take extremely precautions, especially now that the baby is here. By washing our hands more frequently, taking showers once we come from outside, mopping the floor every day, and leaving the shoes outside. I never thought that this virus was going to last all this time. When I really took me serious was when everything was closed, the streets were so empty, the train without one soul. It was very sad. I was so overwhelmed, especially because all I could think of is how I was going to bring an innocent baby to this world where we cannot even hug or visit family and travel safely and have no job and most importantly, the baby safety. I was so scared to go to doctor's appointment or let anybody touch my belly. It was hard for me to trust people in the hospital. Coronavirus had me very traumatized because my mental health wasn't good at the time. I decided to stop watching the news, social medias, because every day was something new and more death and more questions, but no answers. What can I say? What I can say is that I'm truly grateful that I got my daughter here with me and healthy. She's the most beautiful thing that happened to me in the middle of all of this crisis. In conclusion, this pandemic showed me to value family more than ever, to make time to see what's going on in the household, and to give to those in need. Thank you.
Wow. It's funny. While you were reading that, I started thinking and saying like, oh yeah, that's right. It's like, I think one of the things that we're on the other side of the epicenter aspect of things, like, things are getting better. People are getting vaccinated.
Yeah.
The medical system, at least in New York City, New York State, is not overwhelmed currently. And there's hope. But we do forget, when you started talking about that, avoiding the news.
Yes.
My wife is a big Rachel Maddow fan.
Mhm.
And so, I usually, I'm done by 5 or 6 o'clock after all of this Zooming. I'm done. I go up to my bed and I start watching whatever. Like right now, I'm like rewatching the entire Game of Thrones, right?
Ooh,
Just
awesome.
to get out of, just to get out of my head. But she would come up, and at 9 o'clock, she'd put on Rachel Maddow. That'd be the last thing I would see as I was falling asleep. And every day it was like worse.
Okay.
And yeah, at some point, I think we decided like, maybe we don't watch Rachel Maddow anymore for a little while. Maybe we watch, she watches like people buying houses in Maine and rebuilding them or whatever it is, whatever we call that, real estate pornography or food pornography.
But it really brings up a good point though too, because a number of students, I can think of one fellow, Frank Vasquez, who at the end of the course wrote, "I'm so glad we did this because once this is over, I will be able to look back and it will connect me with the intensity of the feeling." And that, in a sense, that's what you're describing now. You almost lose the absolute intensity of
How it works.
March, April, May. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the whole notion behind the time capsule, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where you throw a bunch of stuff into a box and then close it up, and it's the cornerstone of the building, and they open it up 100 years later and find out what people have been through.
I asked students last fall to do that too, and really, it was interesting, even though, you think of like last September as still being sort of very, very much within the crucible of this. But in September, the responses had a much different perspective. It wasn't the same sense of immediacy. There was already in September this sense of sort of looking back on the pandemic. And, now 6 months after that, that still seems sort of very much in the middle of the cauldron. And yet, and that too gives a gloss on the perspective, the varying perspectives of history.
So how do you think this Alba affected you as a student to be basically being a historian of sorts? I mean, you take the class on a lark, right? One of many possible pathways, flexible core courses, right? I'm guessing. And but like you said, it's a nice dovetail for the process of becoming a citizen as well. Next minute, you're in the middle of a historical moment.
Yeah.
And you're the reporter. You're the documenter. So what was that like? As
Yeah, when I was writing this essay in particular, I remember I was going through what you call postpartum depression, because we were still in the middle of the pandemic, and I was most of the time alone in the house with the baby, and I'm only 22 years old at the time. I was 21, and I'm a first time mom, so there was a lot of things that I didn't know. Even though I had my mom, but she's an essential worker, so she wasn't with me most of the time. I was very depression, and when the professor gave this assignment, I saw this as a relief for me to say what I was feeling at the time. Also, I'm the only one that speaks English in my house, so I was also frustrated at the things that I had to kind of put up my family up to date too. So even though I stopped watching the news, there was time that I needed to put my family up to date because they don't speak English. So I a lot of the times I had to, like, my mom would say, "What's going on in the news? Can you please translate?" Most of the Spanish channels at the time that she was home, they were not, doing the live show. So I was forced sometimes to look at the news and tell my mom, look at what is going on, and it would affect me a lot. Plus, I was going to postpartum depression. So when the professor gave this assignment, it was the best thing. I really put all my feelings to it. I poured my heart, and so it was such a relief. Yes, it was.
Yeah, I mean, Alba's case is an extreme, obviously, because of just the hormonal roller coaster, which is childbearing, which men have no understanding of. Right? But was this some of the kind of feedback you were getting from students, Dr. Mazzaria, about what it was like to do this kind of work?
Very definitely. I remember what one of your classmates wrote in a very humorous essay. She was like, "I'm in my room by myself, and I want to shut the news off. Then I walk down the hallway in a small apartment, and there's my mother yelling at the television." and so I talk with her until I can't take it anymore, and then I go back down the hallway into my room where I'm by myself. And then when I can't take being isolated, then I go back down the hallway, and there's my mother yelling at the television again. So
that's sorry.
That's the thing. Yeah, we live in New York, so our apartments are very small. So everywhere you go, you bump into each other, and just you can even go nowhere but the bathroom, kitchen, room.
There's
one of your classmates. The first day that he could get out, he sent me a photograph of the empty sidewalk in front of his house. Typical street on, it was probably Elmhurst, and just an empty sidewalk on a sunny day was you can see it was a revelation to him, and he wanted to document an empty sidewalk in Queens because it was the first time he had seen it in a month.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, a lot of things are coming to me while listening to you talk. And in fact, we're going to have Dr. Mazzaria read some of these excerpts because Alba's going to leave us in about 5 minutes. But one of the things I'm remembering, and I guess I'm not in New York City. I'm actually, like, before the pandemic hit, in fact, over a year ago, before the pandemic hit, my wife and I had bought a place in Connecticut and had moved out there, and we were commuting in and staying in town for a few days, working, teaching, and then going back and forth. So I've missed all of the New York theater experience. But one thing is I was remembering is if it had happened to us when we were still living in Brooklyn, we had like a 3-room apartment, and my wife couldn't stand me then when I would be in the house. Like I would have to go to the college on a Saturday or even a Sunday because if she was doing something in the house and I was underfoot, that. But also, and I don't know if this happens anymore, but remember when everybody was applauding the health workers in the middle of? Is that still happening at like shift change anymore?
No, it's not. And in fact, there was a skit on Saturday Night Live this last week.
Oh, really?
About that and about it sort of diminishing as time went along. Sort of when is the proper time to stop banging the pots and pans?
Well, in some way, I mean, I'm sure people feel like they want to celebrate the healthcare workers who are the great heroes here, some of the great heroes of the pandemic. But in the same breath, again, it's this, going back to normalcy. It's a sign that things are getting better.
Yes.
That people are forgetting that
Indeed.
they need to celebrate these folks who are under this great duress.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Alba, we got to, because you got to go back to work. We got about 3 minutes left, so I wanted to give you an opportunity. Any last remarks you wanted to make before you have to go?
No, I mean, I just want to say thank you guys. Thank you, Professor, for choosing my writing. I didn't even know it was going to be such a great paper. It's something that my daughter eventually she's going to look back to, and I'm sure she's going to be proud of me. But things are getting better. I now that I got vaccinated, everybody in my family got vaccinated. I actually feel more relieved to like go outside. I work from home. Everything is at home, so I eventually don't go out as much, but now I feel much safer. And just, things are getting better. I hope that everybody stays safe. And thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I didn't ask, but what's your major?
Healthcare management.
Right. You mentioned that before.
Yeah.
So does that mean you end up in the health science department, or where does that come out of? Is that in business?
It's in the business. Yes, it's my major is business, concentrated in the healthcare management. That's what I do now. So I work for a remote company called Kasan, which we take care of patients from the administrative part of the offices, the clinics and stuff.
Right. And because the country is still under a state of emergency until the end of this calendar year, there's going to be certain. It's very different. It's a very different time for healthcare management. I know this because my wife, who is a psychotherapist, is constantly arguing with me about the healthcare companies challenging her bills and but the fact that she can still do telehealth.
Yes,
has been a salvation for her patients and for her in a sense. It's changed her practice, and in some ways, I think she wishes she could perpetuate it to some degree.
Yeah, it's a new world now. Technology is the major part of our life now, so just got to get used to it.
What will we accept and what we won't accept? Well, I just want to thank you for being on the show.
Thank you.
And good luck.
Thank you.
Good luck with that, and thank you for sharing your story with us. And I just wish you the best for your family and your daughter.
Thank you so much.
Okay, so thanks for being on the show.
Thank you so much, guys. I hope you guys have a great day.
You too.
Thanks, Albert.
So Dr. Mazzari, why don't we take this opportunity? Usually in the last quarter hour, we open it up to questions. I don't know if we've got folks watching along who want to send a question through the Twitch chat. But while we wait, I wanted to give you an opportunity to read some other of these submissions that your students did that could give us a kind of a taste of what you were reading, what you were getting, and what you're archiving.
Well, maybe to continue with the theme of the healthcare industry, I can read this one that's literary. That's a almost more like a short story, and it would probably take like 5 to 10 minutes, no more than 10 minutes. But it's a very intense depiction of right from the middle of the storm.
Well, let's go ahead and do it. If we run over a little bit, that's okay.
Okay. So, Terrell McCall. This is dated April 2nd, and it's titled "A Night of Tears." Today is the morning of April 2nd, 2020. My head is still killing me with a throbbing headache. It's one of those headaches that feels like a cold gust of wind has passed you by. I wonder why I have this headache. Maybe it's because of the school and job work I have to do. Perhaps it's the several weeks of distancing myself socially, quarantine. Maybe it's the constant days of scrolling through Twitter and updating the trending feed every few seconds. I know I'm avoiding the giant elephant in the room, but let me talk about some other things, okay? Diary, I have been eating everything in sight. Seriously, I think I have a problem. Cookies, chips, you name it. Not healthy, I know, but these are challenging times we are having at the moment, and eating a lot when I'm stressed. Besides me eating everything in sight, I can't pay attention in my classes. I find myself on my phone, checking news about you know what. I try my hardest to pay attention, but it's really difficult. I feel dumb and stupid because I don't understand anything. It's not fair. I never signed up for online classes. I spend more time playing video games than studying. Maybe another reason for my headaches? Diary, as I mentioned before, scrolling through Twitter, checking trending every second. I don't know why I do this. No, honestly, I don't know why. The past few days, I've read tweet after tweet of people making memes about you know what. Laughing, and I even caught myself laughing at them. I'm not proud. I see a big divide of people who hate Trump for how he has handled this whole situation, and others who love Trump for the same reason. I've seen celebrities being praised for speaking up about this entire thing. It's annoying, but I can't seem to stop looking. I don't watch much TV nowadays, but I do watch YouTube videos. And guess what? All I see on YouTube is about what I will not name. Another reason for my headaches? My mom has been freaking out. She wears masks and gloves everywhere she goes. I mean, she must know that she needs something to protect her eyes since it travels through the eyes as well, right? All she talks about is how bad it's getting and how it's making me lose my mind. Like, okay, I get it. I enough stress over this whole quarantine thing and I need a reminder of it, but I know she means no harm. Maybe another reason for my headaches? I feel like if she mentions you know what one more time, I will lose my mind. I've washed my hands more time than is humanly possible to count. Hand sanitizer has become my best friend, and that's really depressing. My dad is sick, and he claims it's just a cold, but he's near 60s and has hypertension and diabetes. He has a fever of over 100 two days ago, but says he feels better. He doesn't believe in what's going on in the world now, and I don't blame him. because it's a tough thing to wrap your mind around. But when you read the Bible as frequently as I do, it's not as much as you think. You would understand that God warned his children of everything that's happening now. Maybe another reason for my headaches? I learned last night that a family friend passed from coronavirus. Diary, I finally said its name. She was in her late 20s and suffered from asthma. Dad said she went to the hospital with symptoms, and they turned away and said to quarantine herself for 14 days. Diary, she didn't make it the full 14. Last night I cried. I cried because my mom said that I knew her when I have no recollection. I will remember once I see a picture of her. Diary, I cried. I cried because she lost her life so young. I cried because she didn't deserve to lose her life. I cried because of the pain her family is feeling right now. Diary, I cried because so many people are suffering from this virus, and yet not enough people are taking it seriously enough. I cried for the families who've lost their loved ones. I cried for the beautiful people who are no longer with us. I cried because I finally realized this might be the end. Diary, I'm crying right now writing this because I know the reason for my headache, fear. Dear Diary, I hope that in 10 years, we will be better prepared for a pandemic like COVID-19. I hope if this isn't the end of the world, that we will continue to wash our hands on a daily basis. I hope that we can be more respectful of each other and love one another. Diary, I hope to become a historical researcher and read about the reactions of young New Yorkers first confronted by this virus. I hope to find helpful that New Yorkers were tough and defeated this virus and won. I hope to find that New Yorkers took it seriously. And lastly, Diary, I hope to find that this throbbing headache is gone.
Wow. That was something.
Isn't it?
And you read it well, by the way.
Thank you. But, you know, as I say, the intensity, you know, and really I was so interested to hear Alba say that, and almost a sense of, which I got reading hers and so many others, almost a sense of catharsis, and you know, again, talking about technology and talking about going online and talking about all of these different aspects that we've come to become so accustomed to, whether it's Zoom or whatever, and yet it's actual writing that has really been cathartic for. And now it's hundreds of students that I've been dealing with, and you know, been privileged to read their writing, and putting pen to paper has really had a great effect on so many 20-year-olds in this year of last year of pandemic. It's very interesting.
Yeah, as an artist, I think about the kind of art that's going to come out of this period as a result. You know, like you were talking about the cathartic act, and I mean, I did that for many years. You know, work through my problems through my art. I was thinking when you were reading, and again, the dramaticness of it. You know, it'd be interesting. You know, right now you're collecting this work. It's part of your pedagogical process. It's also it's part of the archive historical process, which the LaGuardia Wagner archives are engaging with you in that process. But I could see somebody take these narratives and, you know, dramatize them in some sort of thing. Stephanie Sertich, who teaches drama for us in humanities, she does a thing called devised theater, where the students basically come up with their own plays as a response to their lives and some sort of focus. And she's had some pretty powerful results. I could, you know, right now, I don't know if people really want to hear these narratives because they're just coming out of it. They're just trying, and by the way, some people are still in it. like I said, I had a student today who just sent me, telling me that, they think they've contracted the virus.
Yeah.
But a time will come when we may want to look back, and it would be interesting to see if we could then, do a reading where folks would read some of these first-person narratives of what they're going through.
For sure.
It's a gift that keeps giving here.
And later in the semester, I asked people if they would put themselves 10 years distant and put themselves in the place of a researcher in 2030, looking back, and that created some dramatic perspective as well. And just what you're saying, I use the word literary, but it's absolutely dramatic too, and one after another, and yet they're not all as harrowing as that one. Some are humorous, and I think that's part of what would actually make just such a gripping, a compelling, dramatic presentation, is because there's even the variety in terms of emotion. I mean, some are humorous, some are really, some are comic, and others are just filled with pathos.
Yeah, the entire human condition.
Absolutely.
Well, actually, I think this may, we were talking about if we had to go over, we go over, but I think we've done a lot in an hour.
Yeah.
So we might be able to call it. But I wanted to give you an opportunity. We have about a minute or so. Anybody you want to thank, or any last words you want to say before we sign off?
Well, yeah, two things. Maybe it's just reiterating, but to thank Dr. Lieberman for really having, as I say, it's like right on the very cusp of the lockdown. LaGuardia Archives was sort of right out there. And secondly, and to say again, and really in a way to follow up on your comment about drama and the arts, it's interesting. It's interesting to me how, on the one hand, yes, the technology has been has really come to the forefront, and yet at the same time, writing. And I mean, these pieces sort of, some of them approach literature, and the arts is so bound up in what I was seeing last spring, and have seen sort of ever since. And it's I just mentioned one other thing too. It's almost like it's related in a way. I've seen artistry in so many, even unrelated to COVID. I just read a student who's a man in his 30s who's came to New York about 10 or 15 years ago from Nepal, and we're just talking about the space race in class. So, and he sent me this moving account of how, as a child growing up in Nepal and following the space race and the Apollo 11 landing on the moon, that caused him to determine that he wanted to come to New York and become an American. And his whole life was changed by. So you talk about the different things that American history as a field can sort of bring up, and the different emotions and the different, it's absolutely integrated with art. There's sort of no way to separate it. And, you can see it in the writing of a new American from Nepal. You can see it in a new mother from the Dominican Republic. You can see it in so many different ways. And COVID has just, if anything, really merely intensified the already intense emotions of so many LaGuardia students. And that's part of why it's a privilege to have taught here for 5 years.
Well, I want to thank you for not only for being on the show, but just the great work you're doing as a teacher and sharing some of that with us today. So you've been watching What's Going On. I'm your host, Hugo Fernandez, here on LaGuardia Web Radio, WLGR. And my guest today has been Dr. Louis Mazzaria from the Social Science Department, who teaches American history and has been working with students to take down their first-person narratives of the COVID pandemic experience, COVID-19, and is archiving those in the LaGuardia Wagner archives in collaboration with Dr. Richard Lieberman and his staff. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. And Mr. Pope. Oh, and we also special thanks to Alba Hanau, our student who came on and gave us some of her very precious time at lunch to be with us today. So, Mr. Pope, please take us out as you brought us in today. Thanks.